development, cost, consequence, and policy options in Iowa. I want to be sure to give special thanks for your support to this event to Iowa State University's Extension and Outreach, and to the College of Human Sciences, and the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and the Political Science Department in particular. Also want to make sure to offer special welcome and our collective thanks to all of today's speakers, keynote address, panel members, and to members of the Iowa Legislature who are present, representatives of the executive branch, and all others for your participation today. And we're also grateful to Brada's Restaurant, by the way, for giving us the food that's in that table, so please feel free to indulge. It's a good idea to sit right by the food. I do want to make sure that you have all got one of these packets in the red folder. So as you know, there's an agenda. There is a briefing report which includes information about speakers, very nice color photos of each, and biographies, and some topical material. Also inserted an abstract of Pat's talk, as well as talk. And as a guest resistance, the last thing before you guys leave, it'd be very wonderful if you fill out this golden rod, I guess it is officially, sheet of paper that is asking for advice about what to do in the future, as well as your reaction to today's event.
And when you hand that in to us at the end, you get a piece of candy!
Yeah, which is in that wicker basket on the left of the table. So we have a nice reward structure. Let me tell you just for a couple of minutes about what we do in these seminars, if you're not familiar with them. So the Family Impact Seminars, including Iowa's 7th today, are conducted following a model that's really been used for decades, mainly pioneered to the University of Wisconsin for their extension service. Dr. Karen Bogenschneider at UW Extension has organized this for decades. And more recently, the Family Impact Seminars are coordinated through Purdue University for the Family Impact Institute. So they kind of shifted headquarters. So the Family Impact Seminars are structured to provide state policymakers with nonpartisan, solution-oriented research on family issues, such as today's focus, on toxic stress and child development. Policy issues related to families and child development are relevant, of course, to many aspects of decision-making in Iowa. And our focus on that topic today represents a commitment of the Family Impact Seminars in Iowa and nationally to address major issues that rise to the top of the policymaking agenda. So essentially what we do is solicit input from legislators and find out what you're most interested in, and that's where our topics tend to come from. Which does mean the topics vary a fair bit from one session to another, depending upon what's on the agenda. So we try to dovetail as much as we can with the state of interest. And actually these seminars nationally, and of course in Iowa, are established precisely to provide a better connection between the research community and the public policy community, as well as practitioners, and to promote a family perspective for policymaking processes and outcomes. By the way, currently 25 states and the District of Columbia are engaged in something similar to what we're doing today. They have a little bit different structures, but so this is not exactly universal, but it covers half the country. And there are other states that have done it in the past and don't do it any longer, so most states have done it at one point or another. I want to be sure to give thanks for its due in particular to two extraordinary students who are right here, Sage, Elijah, and Rachel Boast, former student, who now is in charge of a whole bunch of millions of dollars for the engineering college, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Millions.
And I would say this is the kind of person we go to if you want to submit a multi-million-dollar grant and have a good chance of getting it. So you want to know about it. So please join me in thanking them for the work they put in. A little bit later on, it's kind of hidden away in my suitcase over there. I'll give them proper awards a little bit later, something a little bit more tangible. So you get stuff, actually. So we have a full and informative agenda ahead of us today, and I want to be mindful of your time commitments for this afternoon, your schedules. So I would like to try to just say a couple more words and then turn this over to Levitt, and he'll speak. The panel members will have comments, and you're welcome to speechify it too. And I think Diane Weisstrom has some questions for you. Right? Okay. That's kind of what the agenda looks
I
like.
haven't seen any of them.
Well, that's sort of by design, actually.
Exactly.
It wants to be a very genuine experience. So in just a moment, I just mentioned Diane, in just a moment I will leave you in her most capable hands. Diane, if you don't know her already, is director of the Carrie Chapman Cass Center for Women in Politics at Iowa State University. And this is one of the premier, if not the premier, such entity in the country. And it's really thanks to Diane's excellent work over the last couple of decades. So way to go. So Diane will actually be the official MC. She'll introduce Dr. Levitt, panel members, and will be engaged in the colloquy. Right? And I'd like to make sure that this does become a genuine colloquy, discussion of issues as you see fit that come up during the discussion. Diane is really expert, by the way, getting people to talk. Is that a fair thing to say? Yeah, so you're not going to be able to sit there and be quiet for very long. She'll call on you and make sure you get engaged. Let me tell you just a very brief little bit about Diane, and you'll have a better sense why she's just perfect for the MC role here to moderate today's session. So Dr. Weisstrom is a co-author, co-editor, and contributor to a really impressive array of books. I've lost count, but 19. Pretty impressive. But let's call it 21 then. And these are on topics like gender and candidate communication, legislative women, getting elected, getting ahead, gender in elections, anticipating Madam President.
Was it several years ago?
Yeah, who knows what's going to happen? We'll see. And women transforming Congress. Her research interests focus on two major areas. One is about styles and strategies used by women and men political candidates, especially in advertising, campaign advertising. And second area is coverage of female and male candidates and political leaders by media. Is that a fair summary? Okay, very good. She, by the way, is a frequent commentator about political issues and women's issues. If you've been in Iowa for any length of time, you've probably seen her on TV a whole bunch of times. You're plugged into USA Today, I think, to their panel.
I'm a coach for
Yeah.
GOP power rankings every week.
Yeah. And you just had Carly going down, I think.
I did this week, so.
Yeah, okay.
But I've had her out.
Well, just understand, she has national and even global impact on things like elections. So please join me in welcoming Diane Weisstrom.
Thank you for those kind words. And yes, the Carrie Chapman Cass Center for Women in Politics is the second oldest university-based center for women in politics in the country. I would say that the Center for American Women in Politics at Rutgers is equal. It's the oldest, and they're equally great as us. And so, but again, I think Iowans have a lot to be proud of for the state establishing this center at Iowa State University in 1992, and I've been the director since 1996, so a long time. So, as usual, Mac has gotten together a great topic. I was telling Representative Custer just a few minutes ago is that I always learn a lot of these things because as you can see with my research, I really don't do a lot of research on some of these topics that we have in the Family Impact Seminar, but I always feel like I learn a lot, and that certainly learning really informs, I think, what you do and whatever you do research on, so I think it's really interesting to me. And obviously, covering communication strategies of candidates and the media coverage embraces lots of different issues that you all talk about as public policy makers, and so I'm interested in that as well. But again, I think today we have our usual format where we'll have national level attention on this issue as well as a state perspective, which I think is a really, again, helpful perspective for you all to share. So it's my pleasure now to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Pat Levitt. He's the Sims Mann Chair in Developmental Neurogenetics. Sorry.
Neurogenetics.
Okay, good.
Not neurogenics.
Institute for the Developing Mind at Children's Hospital in Los Angeles, as well as the W.M. Keck Provost Professor of Neurogenetics at the Keck School of Medicine at the University of Southern California. His work has been recognized with awards from the National Institute of Mental Health and the McKnight Foundation. He is an elected fellow of the American Association of the Advancement of Science, really big honor in this country, and an elected member of the National Academy of Medicine and a senior fellow at the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard University. Dr. Lovett serves as Scientific Director of the National Scientific Council on the Developing Child, which is a policy council that brings the best research from children development and neuroscience to assist state and federal policymakers and private sector business leaders in making decisions regarding children program investment. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Pat Lovett.
Well, thanks, Mac, for asking me to come, and also thanks for being flexible in terms of the dates. I was just in Chicago at the Society for Neuroscience meeting, which was our annual meeting of neuroscientists, and there were 40,000 of us in North America and Europe and the Pacific Rim that are members of that. So it's cozy. It's a cozy gathering. I should mention that I was born and raised in New Jersey, so I was glad to hear that Rutgers is in Iowa or right here.
We are friends.
I have lots of friends who run Rutgers. The other thing I want to point out is this website, developingchild.harvard.edu. That houses the National Scientific Council for the Developing Child information, all of the working papers that we write, and you'll notice that there are no authors because members of the council are the authors, even though somebody may take the lead. Videos, I'll show some today. It's all that information at that website, freely available. It continues to grow. And I think it's a great start if you decide that this is an impact area that is really worth pursuing, and hopefully by the end of the session we have today, everybody will be extraordinarily enthusiastic about that. So this is the conclusion that I start with, which is the healthy development of young children provides a strong foundation for healthy and competent adulthood, responsible citizenship, economic productivity, strong communities, and just and fair society. In other words, how one develops, how well one develops, is going to be reflected in how one is able to be an independent, contributing member of society as an adult. It doesn't start in adulthood. It actually starts prenatally, but it goes through childhood. And there's about 100 years of research that basically talks about how important development is. And think about development this way. Development is essentially designed to create the capacity to be able to operate in an environment in which the individual or the organism thinks it's going to operate. Right? It's preparing itself to operate, whether it's limited food sources that they have during development. They actually individuals change their metabolism to adapt to what they think is going to be limited food sources as adults, right? If any kind of experience that one has during development is essentially setting up the system to be able to function and survive under whatever conditions it believes it's going to run into. Now, it can't predict everything, so it uses experience as a way of sort of setting the system up. That's what development does, sets the system up to be able to function as best as possible under those conditions. And you'll see when I talk about the neuroscience of this, the brain science of this, that sometimes the early experiences that occur set the system up to adapt, and that turns out to be maladaptive for the lifetime of the individual. And that's where it all starts. So this is a fact. This is an economic fact. This is not a neuroscience fact. This is Jim Heckman, who's one of the most strongest free market economists in the world, won a Nobel Prize. States with low child adolescent achievement will fall off the economic development cliff. That's simple. One of my colleagues, Judy Cameron, who's at the University of Pittsburgh, she's on council. She just went to the state of Louisiana, where they're now graduating approximately 30% of their high school students, or lower. Less than 30%. They can't attract a business there. What business is going to move there when the growing workforce is essentially going to be uneducated? So this is what Jim Heckman says. This is what Art Rolnick said. It was head of the Minnesota Federal Reserve Research Group. And it makes sense in terms of the neuroscience of child and brain development. So you have these listed. These are the seven points of the core story, and I'll point out a few of them. Brains are built over time from the bottom up. That is, simple skills come online first as the brain develops. And has anyone coached kids in any kind of a sport? Okay, does the first practice involve a game? What does it involve? I thought they were going to be interactive.
Come on, the other.
What does that first or second and third and fourth and fifth practice involve? Skill development, simple skills, soccer, baseball. I coach my kids in, I lost count of the number of sports. And so it is a reflection of the fact that simple skills have to come online first before more complex skills do. So if simple skills fail to develop well, there won't be complex skills that will be able to sort of take up for that. There's no longer a debate about genes or experience, which is more important. It has nothing to do with that. Genes are influenced by experience. Genes are the blueprint by which we begin our development, but experience is critical for driving the development of the brain. The brain is not the liver, it's not the kidney, it's not the heart, all of which I love, by the way. I love all those. I love all those. But the brain is uniquely designed to take in experience and use it to further its own development. That's actually what changed me from going into political science. Of course, I had at the University of Chicago, where I was an undergraduate, from a biologist who talked about development, and for me it was a miracle in imagining how this could actually occur. And there was a few lectures on brain development. I said, this is unbelievable how important experience is in driving this. What an amazing design is to use experience to sort of build the skills that you think you're going to use for the rest of your life. Sort of what my opening comments were. Cognitive, social, emotional development are inextricably intertwined. Period. The circuits that mediate those complex events are actually overlapping. So when experience affects one, it's going to affect the other. When it has a negative experience on one, it's going to affect the other. And then programs that focus on a dimension don't work. We already know that, right? And I'm not a big fan of programs that don't work. And I'm not a policymaker, so I'm really not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to tell you that this is what the science tells us. And we study these circuits, so when I'm in my science life, this is what we study, to try to understand how they develop. Toxic stress, early adversity, damages the structure, the brain architecture, as it develops. The thing about the brain is that it does use experience to build itself, but it doesn't, unfortunately, it doesn't differentiate between negative experiences and positive experiences. Experiences that occur over and over and over again are very powerful and build the circuits to function in a certain way. And I'll give you some examples of that. Resilience, the ability to respond to adversity, is not an internal character strength. It's built through combined impact of how circuits develop. This is a very challenging concept for us to talk about in terms of policy because rugged individualism is part of our culture and society. And so if you fail, you're weak, and if you don't fail, then you're strong. And in fact, from the perspective of biology, that's not how it works. You can actually influence and build resilience. So for many functions, the brain's capacity for change decreases over time. This is the pay me now or pay me later kind of thing. Not all functions are impacted in the same way. Some take a long time to develop. Does anyone have had the unfortunate experience of interacting with a teenager? Sorry.
I'm 21. I'm not.
There you go. If anybody believes that brain development ends at 3 or 4 or 5, really, just think about your interactions with your own teenagers or somebody else's teenagers. The brain continues to develop, and I'll talk about the functions that continue to develop. So here's some misconceptions. Children are, what is that?
Sponge.
Yeah. Just put them in an area where lots of stuff is happening and they'll just learn it. It doesn't happen that way. Humans are social. We're very, very social. And so engagement during the process of learning, that's why social and cognition are so tightly connected to each other. We don't learn in the absence of social engagement, right? Putting a child in front of a video and then walking out of the room, I can tell you, lots of studies now, doesn't work. And I'll give you some examples. Even birds can't learn what they have to learn without social engagement. 80% of brain development occurs, you can say it, by the third birthday. Not true. Right, sure. So it is the case that the brain grows to 80% of its adult size, but that doesn't mean it's mature, right? So it's not that 80% of brain development occurs by the age of 3. It's that the size of the brain, and the size of the brain doesn't necessarily mean, I mean, the heart is, in a 3-year-old grows a bit, but it doesn't grow very much more. That doesn't mean it's the same as an adult heart, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Bad stuff happens, you just have to be tough. Yeah. I'm from California. The truth of the matter is I lived in California twice. I got my PhD in University of California, San Diego. After Chicago for 4 years, I looked for the warmest place to. That was La Jolla is pretty close to being the warmest place that had a great neuroscience program. And Jerry Brown was my governor in 1975 when I started graduate school. When I moved back to California in 2009, yeah. 1975, I think he was like 3. No, actually, he was in his 30s. Ready to learn is all about just, you know, ready to learn, just remembering numbers, letters, et cetera, et cetera. That's part of it, but it's not nearly all of it. Okay. So this is what the brain looks like in a newborn. These are drawings, these are neurons. In 1 month, it looks like there are more nerve cells there, but there actually aren't. The nerve cells are growing in terms of these processes. The processes are where these nerve connections are built in the speed of about 700 per second. So snap your fingers, 700. So if you see a 2-year-old, 700 connections being made every second. And it starts looking like a garden that needs some thatching, right? In fact, we overproduce more connections. We overproduce connections and get rid of about 40% of them through experience. We keep the ones that we solidify through experience that are functioning extremely well and very efficiently, and we get rid of the connections that we don't really need, right? So there's a pruning part to this process, kind of like what we do in a garden, let it overgrow, in fact, and then when you prune your flowers back, they're hardier than ever, right? So this is at 2 years, right? The same number of nerve cells. We're born with the number of nerve cells that we're going to have for the rest of our lives, except for 2 very small areas that we're not going to talk about today. So let's look at it over time. Birth, 6 years. This is what it looks like at 14 years. I tell people this is not the reason why teenagers are a problem. Going from here to here. It's just, this is the period of time when a lot of action is occurring in terms of remodeling these circuits. 10 billion neurons, 3 trillion connections. This is just in case you go to a party and you want to have a little factoid that you can tell somebody when you don't want to talk about the weather anymore. I'm terrible at parties, so I always like to have like 1 or 2 things in my brain to think about. And so it's a pretty remarkable process from my perspective.
A child's experiences during the earliest years of life have a lasting impact on the
Wait a minute. Why is it, it's pairing and then let me see if it's paired. Not paired. Connect. Wait a minute. I think when it doesn't get used, it gets separated. Okay.
The judgment comes from experience, the experience comes from that judgment.
We said this all up earlier.
Yeah, it worked. I promise you it worked. I think when it's like asleep, here we go.
A child's experiences during the earliest years of life have a lasting impact on the architecture of the developing brain. Genes provide the basic blueprint, but experiences shape the process that determines whether a child's brain will provide a strong or weak foundation for all future learning, behavior, and health. During this important period of brain development, billions of brain cells called neurons send electrical signals to communicate with each other. These connections form circuits that become the basic foundation of brain architecture. Circuits and connections proliferate at a rapid pace and are reinforced through repeated use, Our experiences and environment dictate which circuits and connections get more use. Connections that are used more grow stronger and more permanent. Meanwhile, connections that are used less fade away through a normal process called pruning. Well-used circuits create lightning-fast pathways for neurosignals to travel across regions of the brain. Simple circuits form first, providing a foundation for more complex circuits to build on later. Through this process, neurons form strong circuits and connections for emotions, motor skills, behavioral control, logic, language, and memory during the early critical period of development. With repeated use, these circuits become more efficient and connect to other areas of the brain more rapidly. While they originate in specific areas of the brain, the circuits are interconnected. You can't have one type of skill without the others to support it. Like building a house, everything is connected, and what comes first forms a foundation for all that comes later.
Okay, so that took about 1 minute and 6 seconds, and I took about 10 minutes to say the same thing. Sorry. So remember, development's not a blank slate. It's an active process, right? And so neural circuits are wired up. Our sensory pathways develop first. Why? You're all neuroscientists now. You had 10 minutes of neuroscience. Why do sensory pathways, our vision, our hearing, our touch, why do those circuits develop first? Think about what they do.
We experience those first as babies.
That's the only way we can take information in from the world. So of course we want them there first. We want them to be able to become face experts almost instantaneously, right? So our sensory circuits develop first. Our motor circuits develop a little bit later. It's very funny to watch a 3 or 4 month old try to grab for objects. If I have time, I'll tell you about an amazing experiment that a developmental psychologist did to show the link between motor skill development and social engagement. You think, what do they have to do with each other? It's really quite astounding. And then there's language, and then there's higher cognitive functions, what we call executive function. I'll go through that. Right? So powerful experience, no matter what kind, positive or negative, matter. Our binocular vision develops because we use both of our eyes. And for a child born with amblyopia, there needs to be a period of time where that gets corrected. The way we correct it is not with a pill, right? We don't use a drug, we use experience to correct the circuit. We patch the good eye to use to use the eye that's weak. And the use of that essentially builds strong ocular muscles and completely reorganizes the circuits in the brain so that when you take the patch off, over time, that child gets binocular vision. If you do it too late, it has a very small effect in terms of correction. It's the best example of the importance of how powerful experience can be. If experience can rewire a child's visual system to be able to use both eyes, think of what experience does powerfully in terms of wiring up the social and emotional and cognitive circuits. So here's another example. This is a rat experiment. Okay, this is just a heat map of frequencies that a rat hears, and this is an age when they're still with their mom, so they're developing. This is the size of it, and the blue is low, and the yellow is middle, and the red is high frequency sounds, meaning that the brain cells in these areas will recognize frequencies in that range. Okay, and so this is what it looks like after adolescence. Their hearing system and ours don't mature at the same rate or anything, and of course that makes sense. But look how much smaller it is. Remember that pruning? It's gotten much more efficient, right? It's lean, mean fighting machine, right? It's got 3 areas really well designated. It's not having to maintain all these connections. It can do its job by just maintaining this small number of connections. Now, if you raise these rats, these pups, at this age, in the red frequency, what will the map look like? Anybody want to guess? Will the map look like this, or will it look like, okay, it'll look like that, for the rest of the animal's life? Why? Well, if I'm this rat and all I'm hearing are high frequency sounds, I want my auditory system to be tuned to those sounds, because that's what I'm going to hear for the rest of my life. right? So it uses that frequency and says, oh, I'm going to build a map that's really efficient for high frequency sounds. So it adapted to how it was raised, by the way, for just like, 10 or 15 days, right? And then you put it back into a normal environment where it's hearing all these frequencies of sounds. Too bad. You already built your system to just be expert in the high frequency sounds. It really actually is very poor at recognizing these other frequencies. Another really great example of how powerful experience is. Again, the circuit got built because it was anticipating during development, this is all I'm going to hear. So if that's all I'm going to hear, that's all I'm going to pay attention to. Okay.
Could you explain high frequency sounds, what those are?
So like ultrasonic sounds, so sound waves come in different frequencies, meaning, these sound waves are really fast or they're really slow, and different sounds can be a high pitch or low pitch, kind of like that, right? So we have brain cells, by the way, that are tuned, that are built just to be expert at recognizing certain pitches of sound. And then we put all that together, right? Millions of those cells come together to essentially allow us to be able to hear sound pitches at all different levels so that we can distinguish a lot of different sounds, right? And for us, actually, our auditory system gets wired up in the same way, and our language system gets wired up in the same way. What we hear as babies, the complexity of the language and the language we hear actually tunes the circuits that allow us to learn the native language. So this is a study that was done, I'm sure you all have seen this, where early on our proficiency for learning a language is really high up until about the age of 7, learning a second language, and then it starts falling off. And by the time we're in junior high school, we're down below half of what we could do if we were 3 or 4 years old. So I don't know what the deal is in Iowa in terms of when you start second language education. Yeah, so if a policymaker once said to me, so are you telling us that we're wasting our money? And I said, yes. I mean, you'll learn some language, but you won't learn it very well, right? I mean, there have been school systems that have changed this and have shown, there's just no one-to-one correspondence. No. We'll get to sleeping teenagers in a moment. Why high school starts at 7:15 and grade school starts at 9 o'clock. When the 7-year-olds are up at 6 o'clock and the teenagers are still not wanting to get up at noon. Okay. So this is the language studies that have been done based really on education levels of the parents and their own vocabulary and complexity. So there's no difference by 16 months. By 24 months, there are small differences. This is college-educated, working-class parents, so high school, and then non-high school graduates, essentially. And this has been replicated over and over and over again. So by the time you get to 36 months, this is the number of words that the child is using at 3 years of age. This is the difference that the child is using in sentences and communicating with, not just parroting back. So it's not about memorizing words. It's about how many words is the child using to communicate at the age of 3. And Pat Poole and Martin Risley and Fernald, all of these groups have basically replicated each other's work, which in science is like, that's what we look for, right? So again, this is all experience-based. This is not about intelligence or anything else. This is just experiencing complex vocabularies as you're developing. Okay, brain growth and poverty. And in this country, poverty is not simply, it's complicated because poverty is really a surrogate, as many people know more about, in this room know more about this today than I, but it's really a reporter for all sorts of problems. It could be prenatal care is not high quality. It could be postnatal health care is not high quality. It could be lack of resources, all sorts of things, single parent, et cetera, et cetera. But if you look at, so this is months down here. This is just measuring the gray matter. That's the cerebral cortex that we talk about that performs all these higher functions. So there's gray matter. You can see the gray matter here. See, there it is there. And you just measure the total volume of it when the infants are in a scanner. For these studies, the same infant gets scanned 3 different times, so you can see what their curve looks like. And this is what it looks like. There's a difference, right? Pretty clear. So, just to show you that it's not just about the brain, but it's about health as well, and Jim Heckman, the economist, has published now a number of papers that focus not just on cognitive and other aspects that deal with brain, but he's focused on health issues as well. He published a paper last year showing the difference between blood pressure as adults if you were in a high-quality early care program versus not a high-quality care program. Blood pressure differences as adults, right, of sometimes 15 or 20 points, right, which is basically a marker for whether you're at risk or not at risk for cardiovascular disease. So this is still one of the more amazing findings that's been replicated again that I find, and I don't have an answer for it, but you can ask me, why would that be? So this is measures of this protein in your blood called IL-6, interleukin 6. It's a marker for when your immune system gets activated with an infection, or you're chronically ill. This protein goes up in your blood, and physicians can measure it. So they had 3 groups of adults who were in their first 2 years of life either in low, middle, or high SES categories, right? Low, middle, or high SES categories. So the higher the protein that you're measuring, the more activated your immune system is, even if you're not sick, right? And having an chronically activated immune system all the time is bad news, right? It's all about then arthritis. It's all about being not prepared to actually deal with a real infection. People who are stressed chronically have activated immune systems. It's a sign of poor health, right? So this is low. This is measured as adults. This is where they were in their first 2 years of life. Look at the difference. It's unbelievable, right? I don't have an answer for it, but it says that development is very powerful in tuning not just your brain, but other parts of your body. How else could you explain the blood pressure findings that these economists got, right? That essentially what's happening is that the early experiences that are negative are having an effect on your stress systems, and those are probably responsible for creating weakness of health over your lifetime. We can talk more about that. So there are 3 levels of stress that we talk about. One is positive. We all experience that. Children need to experience this, sitting up in a classroom and talking. When I was young, I had to hear my speech hesitate sometimes, not because I'm nervous, but because I have a speech impediment. And when I was growing up, I had a terrible speech impediment. I had no fluent speech. I would never talk. When I got asked to stand up in class, I thought my heart was going to rip out of my chest. Maybe that was positive. I think it was tolerable. I think it was tolerable. The reason it was tolerable is because I had amazing parents and an amazing siblings who supported me going through what I thought was, the end of my life. Every time I had to go to school, right? So supportive relationships is really critical to take activities and events, early experiences that could be damaging, but nonetheless can get buffered. And then there's toxic, prolonged activation of stress response systems in the absence of protective relationships. So we know that in the United States, this is Department of Health and Human Services 2010, most toxic stress is neglect, frank neglect. And I'm not going to go through the criteria, but if you go to the National Scientific Council of the Early Childhood website, it'll explain what's meant by toxic neglect. Right? It's not about your child coming up to you and I can't deal with this now, I'm on the phone. That's not neglect. Neglect is very low interactions between caregiver and child, very low interactions between child and siblings or anyone else, any adult figures or even other children. Most of the court system deals with this. You talk to lawyers and judges. I went in Spokane, Maine, and it included members of the Maine Supreme Court. They were in shock about this statistic because they don't deal with this at all. California, most states don't deal with this at all. If you move a child who's neglected, it usually is triggered by malnutrition, which is, again, a part can be a part of the neglect. Okay.
The key to forming strong brain architecture is what's known as serve and return interaction with adults. In this developmental game, new neural connections form in the brain as young children instinctively serve through babbling, facial expressions, and gestures. And adults return the serve, responding in a very directed, meaningful way. It starts very early in life when a baby coos and the adult interacts and directs the baby's attention to a face or hand. This interaction forms the foundation of brain architecture upon which all future development will be built. It helps create neural connections between all the different areas of the brain, building the emotional and cognitive skills children need in life. For example, here's how it works for literacy and language skills. When the baby sees an object, the adult says
Baby's on the lap.
This makes connections in the baby's brain between particular sounds and their corresponding objects. Later, adults show young children that those objects and sounds can also be represented by marks on a page. With continued support from adults, children then learn how to decipher writing and eventually to write themselves. Each stage builds on what came before. Ensuring that children have adult caregivers who consistently engage in serve and return interaction, beginning in infancy, builds a foundation in the brain for all the learning, behavior, and health that follow.
So it's not about being engaged all the time. You gotta have some downtime, but that downtime is all about taking what you've been doing during the day or been thinking about or been exposed to in this kind of social environment, and then sort of processing it, right? That's what the downtime is about. But in the absence of that time in which you're actually learning in the context of social engagement, social interactions, that learning just doesn't occur. So serve and return is essentially that. What are you going to do now?
I was going to throw it back to you.
Thank you.
Yes, I was going to either.
If you don't throw it back to me, then I'm like, huh? Really? No, that doesn't work that way. That's serve and return, right? That's interaction. And there's an expectation that if you engage me and say something to me and I don't say anything to you, I ignore you, how happy are you about that? So imagine a 2-year-old going through that, right?
Our biology is the need to have responsive interactions with adults.
Neglect for children is when they don't get what the brain is expecting to get, what the child is expecting to get, what we are biologically prepared and waiting for, which is input from those around us.
It's this back and forth serve and return interaction that literally shapes the architecture of the brain.
Serve and return begins when a child looks at something or observes something, makes an utterance, and that represents the serve. And the return is when the parent notices the child doing these things and responds to the child.
Under conditions where serve and return is broken, you literally are pulling away what is the essential ingredient of the development of human brain architecture.
It was a really compelling series of experiments where they started by videotaping the mother of the baby engaging in cooing and smiling. And then they asked the mother to basically put on a blank face and not respond at all. When a baby is not attended to, that is a sign of danger to the baby biologically. So the stress systems become activated.
And a brain that is constantly bathed in stress hormones, not that's up and down, that comes with normal development. Certain key synapses, the connections between nerves fail to form.
So we still face all the time. That's a very famous experiment that's done, and it's so powerful. It's unbelievable. How, in the absence, it happens. For some infants, it can happen within 30 seconds. For others, it can happen almost instantaneously, depending on what the interaction is. So it's very, very powerful. And so and I have been talking about this for 10 minutes. You can probably tell that if you think about anything about child brain development, it's all about this. This is the scaffold upon which everything else can get hung and which development will occur in a really positive way. The social framework is critical, right? Social framework is critical. Studies that were done by Seth Pollack at the University of Wisconsin back in 2002 show you how early adversity, early adverse experiences, in this case it's abuse, these are 3 to 6-year-olds who were asked, they had a community sample of children who were physically abused. So they were asked, tell me where you see the change from one emotion to another. If you notice, it's about halfway across, right? Going from happy to fearful, happy to sad. And there was no difference between the children who were abused and the children in the community sample in being able to distinguish between happy, fearful, happy, sad. Now, anger and fear, anger and sad. This is the community sample. These are the children who were physically abused. They actually overrepresent anger. Even a neutral face to them is anger. And you ask, well, why would they do that? And by the way, it takes them longer when they see the face to disengage from it. So why are they overrepresenting it? Even in neutral faces. So by the way, that means that what their world is, you think you know what they're interpreting, and interaction, but in fact they're interpreting a face very, very different. Your face now is very neutral. For a child who's been abused, that's a very angry face. Now that's not. Right? So why do they overrepresent it? Why do they take longer to disengage? That's a question. Anybody?
Safety. It's a
Safety, yeah. They're basically in threat detection mode. We have a circuit, a fear circuit, that allows us to be in threat detection mode. I grew up in New Jersey. I scan my environment for certain threats all the time. And so, we do this all the time. We scan, but we don't even realize that we're in threat detection mode. But we control it, right? We have control over that so that we're not continuously in this fight or flight response. This is what happens. And for children who are neglected, I think I have it written here. For children who are neglected, they have difficulty distinguishing between any faces. They're very poor at processing emotions and faces. And the way that humans actually interact with each other, the way we have theory of mind, like what's going on in your mind now, I'm not quite sure, I've never been here before, but there you go, is by reading very small gestures, very small change in emotion. Infants can do this by the time, by their first year. Also, our voices, how our prosody changes. We go up, we go down, we go louder, we go softer. That has meaning. But you can use the same words and say it loudly and say it softly, and you know the difference in the meaning of what you say, right? So these early experiences essentially set the system up. Yeah.
We just streamed here in Des Moines a documentary called Paper Tigers. It's about the Walla School that's for alternative students and how they approach them very differently, trauma-informed way. The image they used with Paper Tigers was that if they grow up with that kind of stress, that they will see as real tigers, paper tiger situations. In other words, they will overcompensate in seeing situations that are fearful when they really aren't.
Correct.
But paper tigers was the
That's a great example, and I think it's essentially getting back to what I talked about with the rat's auditory system. Why was it only listening to red sound? Why could it only recognize, high frequency sounds? Well, that's all it heard. If you're an infant or a toddler or a young child and you're experiencing frank neglect or abuse or terrible social conditions and social interactions, your brain is going to get wired in a way that's going to essentially deal with that. It's going to overrepresent things that are really actually not.